Okay, geweldig. So we are learning today Daf Samach Vav, Bava Kama, and we got up to about a third of the way down already on Samach Vav Amar Aleph, which ended with the words Amar Rava Tloim Kidimei Kara Damim Kishalachshav. Yesterday's Gemara, we were focusing on Rav's halach. Rav said that when you steal, you pay the Karen Kishasa Gneva, and we learned that from a pasuk of Achya LeKaren Kein Sheganav, but the Kefel, Medal Vehei, is evaluated based on the time of Hamad Abadim. And the Gemara was analyzing what exactly was Rav referring to. Because if the Ganav himself fattened up the animal and made it worth more, why would we cancel him in his Dal Vehei to pay Dal Vehei of a fat behema or to pay Kefel of a fat behema? He was the one who fattened it up. So the Gemara says that's not what Rav is referring to when Rav says that you pay Dal Vei and Kefel Keshasa Madabidin. And if you were Makrishit B'Yodayim, if the Ganav was Makrishit B'Yodayim, of course, once again, why does the Ganav get the benefit from an Avla that he did? He was Makrish to Anab B'Yodayim, and now he's going to pay less. So that's not what Rav means either. Because they're also, you would pay Kefil and Dalvei, Kishas Agsela. So the Gemara was probing to find what Rav was referring to. So there was a point where the Gemara said that Rav was only referring to a case where the market value of the animal changed, not related to the physical condition of the animal. And the Gemara also said, yeah, that only Rav's halach only applies if it went down, because he's looking to be makel on the payment of Dalvei and to be machmer on the payment of Karen. But if the animal went up, Vaiter, you don't say it. You'd say that you pay everything Kein Shegana. The question that we had in the Rishonim was, what if the animal was Hukra Shamamela, if it got weaker by itself? There, would you say that the Kefil and Dalvei is paid Kein Shegana, or is the Dalvei paid based on the animal's stronger state? And we said, according to Rashi, you would pay according to its weakened state, because you didn't weaken it. It wasn't the Ganav who weakened it. But according to Tosfos, since the animal has changed from when it was stolen, according to Rav, you would still pay the Kefel and the Dal V'Hei, Kein Sheganav. But all the way at the end of the Gemara, due to a kasha from a brisa of Tlev Nasa Ayil, Egel, V'Nasa Shor, where the brisa says you pay Tashlume Dalid and Kefel, Kein Sheganav, that posed a problem with Rav, because Rav holds it's Kishas Avadavadin. The Gemara answered, Tloim Kidimei Kar Dom Kishalachshav. And we have three pshatim in this halacha, which would actually have nafkaminas. According to Rashi, we look at what you use, what type of currency you use to pay back. If you're going to pay back with an actual animal, then you can give back a tle, an animal similar to the animal that you stole. But if you're going to pay in cash, then you look at the animal's value as it was when it grew up, when it was already an ayil or a shor, and you'd have to pay today's current value based on the condition of the animal today in its improved and mature state. I didn't find anywhere a good svar, a good pshat to explain why there should be a difference in my liability based on what I decide to pay with. So that was difficult to understand. The Re has a different shot of this. The Re says there's two assessments that are made when you're paying back. A, you have to determine what type of animal you're going to pay for. Are you going to pay for a mature animal, which is the condition of the animal when you shechted it, or are you going to pay for a small animal as it was when you stole it? So for that assessment, Rava says that Rav holds Toloim Kidimei Kara. Even for the Dal of the Hay and for the Kefel, you're paying Dal of the Hay on Kefel on what animal? On an animal that you stole, a small animal. But how much that animal is worth in the marketplace, that's Damim Kishalachshav. You see what its value is in the marketplace today. That's how you assess it. So according to Rava, when you're looking at the physical condition of the animal, you look at the original time of the theft, and when you look at the evaluating the animal, you evaluate it based on today's market rates, which means if it was huk chasham mela, in fact, you would pay based on the original value, because when you're looking at the condition of the animal, you're always looking at the condition of the animal as it was when it was stolen. And then we had Rabbeinu Tam's pshat, which was quite innovative, and that is Taloyim, if it went up, similar to the case of Taloyim that the Gemara quoted, Kidemei you pay the lower amount. Domim, but if it went down, similar to the case of Domim that Rav refers to, Rav's case that he referred to where it went down, will be Keshalachshav. In other words, when it comes to assessing the value of Dalad Vahei and Kefel, you always use the lesser amount, whether it was worth less when it was stolen, or it's worth less now that he did the shchita. It's the lesser amount that he's going to pay. We're always makel with the application of the knas of kefal and of zalveh. And now we're going into a whole new sugya, which is really a tangent that we're building out of what we learned yesterday, because part of what we discussed was shinui. When we discussed the shaila, if an animal matures, tlev and nasa ayil or egel and nasa shar, is that called a shinui? We learned if there's an actual shinui, a real shinui, like you stole wool and you made it into a beged, there's a machlokes b'shamai and b'silo whether or not shinui is koine or not. Here, yesterday the shaila was tlev and nasa ayil, egel and nasa shar. It's a shinu de mamel. It's a shinu that happened by itself as the animal matured. Is that also considered a shinu for the kinyan? And we said that Rabbi Eloi holds it is. Yet there was a brisa that seems to say that it wasn't. Now we're going back to the original idea of shinui and yush. So Amarava, shinui koina. Shinui is koina, that's undoubtedly, of course, according to Beis Hillel. Ksiva, we know it from a pasuk. The tanina, we know it from a brisa. Ksiva, it says in the pasuk, v'heshiv es exela asher gozal, meaning mata madoim asher gozal. Why does the Torah need to say asher gozal? Of course, if you're returning the gzela, it's the gzela that you stole. But we learn from asher gozal that imke ein shegazal, if the geneva, if what you stole is still in the condition that you stole it in, then you have to give it back. Then you have to give back the exact object that you stole. But the imlav, if it's transformed, then domin ba'alma boishlume, the object now belongs to the ganev, and all he has to pay back is domim, is money. That is the pasuk. Tanina, we also have a brayso to support our understanding of the pasuk. It says a gozel eitzim. Someone stole eitzim, v'asin kelim, and he transformed them into kelim. Or tzemer, he stole wool, v'asin begadim. The halacha is mishalim kishas hagzela. He doesn't have to pay back those beautiful clothing or beautiful kelim that he made. He just has to pay the owner back for the raw materials. That's one support in the Mishnayos that shino is kaina. Inami, we have another support in the Mishnayos to prove that shino is kaina, which is a little bit of a different case, which we're going to get into shortly, but I want to take a break first and go into Rashi. Shinui kaina. So Rashi, heichid shani lehu b'yodayim. So we're not talking about a shinui de mamela like we discussed yesterday. Today we're talking about a real shinui b'yodayim. Pshitala, it's pasha to the Gemara de midoraisa vaday kana. It's midoraisa that you're kaina. V'chimahader, and when the ganav pays back what he stole, he doesn't have to give back the actual object that he has from the nigzal. Eladomim mishalim. He can just pay the value of what he stole. For instance, he doesn't have to give the begadim that he made to the nigzal. Rather, he can just give the cost, the value of the temer that he stole. It's a meforsha pasuk. Vitanina, we have mishnayos to support that as well. Avul yiyush, in a moment, the Gemara is going to say yiyush, meaning the fact that the owner gave up on ever getting this back. Is that also a kinyan? Mesaf belay hadam rabbanon kani idaraisi darabbanon. So there's an assumption made that we know that yush is kaina. The question really is it midaraisa or is it midarabbanon? Now we're going to go into the second place where you see in Mishnayos that shinu is kaina. So let's go back to the Gemara. Inami lahizbek listnei lo yachatov. The halacha is when someone shears the wool of his animals, of a sheep, he has to give, if he shears a certain amount, once he hits a certain threshold, there's a chiyuv to give some to the kohen. Well, what if he sheared it all and he was mechuyev to give it to the kohen, and then he died it all, which is a big shinoi. The halach is potter; he does not have to give anything to the kohen. Alma, you see from the fact that he doesn't have to give it to the kohen, that shino is kohen. And Rashi explains, his big listener against the kohen, until it was died. Potter mereishes agez. He's potter from mereishes agez. Why? The kohen b'shino. He was kohen b'shino. So we know that by a ganav, if he's kohen b'shino, he still has to pay the bailam back with cash. Zok Rashi, by reishes agez, he's scot free. He doesn't even have to give the kohen money. Why? Because there's no kohen that can take him to Bezdin and demand that he pay him. Then kohen yochal asmina b'din. Unless all of the kohanim of the world could gather together and take him as one or create one power of attorney, which is not going to happen. So therefore, since no individual kohen could take him to the entire, why? The yochal omer la'acher tended. I can say I never intended to give it to you. I'm giving it to a different kohen. So there's no one who will be able to extract the gracious guess from him. Before he died it, where there it belongs to the kohen, misha chatvai zachaboy. If someone chaps it, if a kohen chaps it, the kohen would be zaycha in the gracious guess. Now, I want to learn Tosfos because it's going to be a little bit difficult. And I'm sure if I looked up Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Makairis, I would find out that there's a little bit of talk about that. And we'll see why in just a moment. Let's see what Tosfos says. Lahizbek listnoi achetzovoy potter. Zok Tosfos, afilu kishagaza shir chamisha rechelos yachad. So now Tosfos is cluing us in. What is the derisidic shir that will trigger a chiyuv to give reishus, I guess, to the kohen if you shear 5 sheep together? Because at that point, Zok Tosfos shechol olav chiyuv reishus, I guess. If you dye them, potter kishatzavoy. You're potter if you dye them. Just like the mitzvah of peah, the mitzvah so bekama. The mitzvah is to leave the peah uncut in your field. And if it was changed, if you hold shinu koina, you would be potter from giving the peah. The Bryce over there says, Gazas rishain vitzavai potter. We're talking about even if you cut 5 straight and you trigger the chiyuv deraisa of reish hagez, if you dye them, you're still potter. So why did the brisa there say that you cut one at a time and dye them? My area rishon. You know, what's the difference that the brisa had to say that you dyed it before you reach the 5 trigger? Even if you reach the 5 trigger and the chiyuv deraisa, by dyeing it, you'll still be potter. So why does the Mishnah there only say that you're potter if you dyed it before it triggered the chiyuv, and you never had a full chiyuv of reish hagez because it was dyed before it was triggered? Here's a key chiddush that Tosfos is teaching us about the mitzvah of reish hagez. There, let's say I cut one at a time, and as I cut each one, I dye them. Even though I end up cutting 20 sheep, I will be potter, even though I only dyed some of them. Even the remaining that I did not dye are all going to be potter. Why? Never was there a trigger of reishus hagez. Since the ones that have been dyed will not be mitzaref. So the last 4, even if you don't dye them, there won't be a chiyuv on them because we're not going to have 5 of undyed wool. Here, once you already sheared 5, now you've triggered a chiyuv of reish hagez. Now the only way you can get away from it is dafka tzavai kuloi potter. Now you'll have to dye every single piece of wool that you sheared because there's a chiyuv on all the wool. If you left some over, what he left over will be chayiv. Afal pi she'ein boy shear, even though there's no shear left, shekfar nischayiv. Once there was a trigger, then any of the wool that you have, you're mechuyev to give it if there's a total of more than 5. Achatzavoi, zok Tosfos, ein lefarish shetzava chelka shel koyin masher hifer shleim legisa. You would think that you cut 5 and you were mafresh sham to give it to the koyin. Now this is the koyin's wool. You dyed it. Now you don't have to give it to the koyin. So it tells you that's not the case. Reish Yagez is not truma. Nowhere does it say that you have to be mafresh Reish Yagez. It just says give it to the kohen. So therefore, never is there any wool that's designated to the kohen that you can then dye and then keep for yourself. Rather, the afrasha kamay gabi truma, the afrasha shaychabe. Aval afrasha's Reish Yagez ain't klum. Masha mafresh l'tzad echad. Uchil lo yafrid. Therefore, if you didn't dye at all, no matter what you left over, that can go to the kohen because you have a chiyuv to give some to the kohen. And you can't say, oh, the kohen's part I dyed, because every part is the kohen's, which explains why the kohen can grab some, because whatever he takes will he'd be entitled to, because the owner doesn't designate which of his rachis gez, which of his wool goes to the kohen. So that is an important chiddush that Tosfos teaches us about rachis gez, that there's no such thing as a hafrasha where you designate part of it to go to the kohen. It just means you have to give from your wool. And even if most of your wool doesn't have to be given because it's dyed, whatever wool you have that has not been dyed would still have to go to the kohen.
Rachis is rachis, but it's automatically designated.
No, it's not automatically designated. It just means you have to give it. Reish Yagez, you have to give. So you're saying that does it mean it has to be the first animal that you shear? Vice the not.
That's what it sounds like.
Right, that's what it sounds like, but that's the chiddush. That's not. Maybe it means a choice, the best ones. Maybe that's a ratio. Just give the good stuff. But there's no mitzvah of Russia. So it's not like you can designate this part as a kohen and then dye it and then you're done. Any part of your wool will always be under a chiyuv to give to the kohen.
How much? How much?
I don't know if where did it say echad meshishim?
Maybe in the article.
Maybe it could be the article. I guess when we get up to Chulum, we'll learn the Pekah Reish Yagez. Chaim says the article says 160th. But that I don't know.
Like by
160th is for Kamtonim. 150th is the Derech HaMamutz.
that's by
Truma.
Well, so if it's 160th, if you have 5 sheep,
From the art scroll.
how does that work?
it
have to have
says that
160th.
every sheep has a lot of wool. It's not
Well, if you're giving 20%, you're giving the equivalent of one sheep. Yes, I don't know the exact amount. Okay.
60 is not one.
Huh? Usually each sheep has 3 bags full. If I remember correctly from my chinuch. There's a nursery rhyme.
It's a nursery rhyme.
There's a nursery rhyme. That black sheep have you any wool? Yes, or yes, or 3 bags full. So I know each sheep can give you 3 bags of wool. Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter.
And I never would imagine this would enter into our nursery rhyme.
Oh, steht in the Gemara. Okay, so we've established without beyond a reasonable doubt that the Torah teaches us that Shinu is kind of. What about Yush? Zogt Gemara, Yush, Amri Rabbanan Nikni. We know that the Rabbanan said that Yush is kind of. Miu, however, Lo Yadinon Idaraisa Idarabanan. We don't know if Midaraisa it's kind of or if Midarabanan it's kind of. What does it mean, Yush? Rashi, Shenishayishu Abaylam. The Bailam have given up any hope of getting it back. Amr Rabbanan the Nikni. The Rabbanan said the Ganav will be kind of. Vidayo imishalam dama. It's enough if the Ganav just pays back the dollar value of the product once the Bailam are miyayish. So he steals a beautiful collector's item watch, and the Bailam are miyayish, and then he wants to pay back. So the halacha is he doesn't have to give back the special sentimental watch because the Bailam are miyayish. He just has to give back the dollar value of the watch. Okay, and we don't know if it's the Raisa or the Rabbanan. Midi dahava moitza veda. Why would it be the Raisa? Either Raisa. If it was the Raisa, you have to see a precedent somewhere that shows that Yush is koina. Midi dahava moitza veda. We should be able to learn from moitza veda. Moitza veda. Don't hesitate to jump on me when you see that this doesn't make sense. Moitza veda. Lav kiven de meyayish mor mina mikamei the asli ade kanile. We know. And Rashi and Tosfos have a dispute as to where we load from, but we know midaraisa that if the Bailam lost something and it was miyayish, and only then did you pick it up, you get to keep it, right? Hi nami, so too by a ganiv, even the miyayish mora, if the Bailam are miyayish, which is clearly after I stole it, because before I stole it, he still has it in his possession, kanile, al makani. That's a little bit difficult to understand, and we'll have to see Rashi and Tosfos. Or maybe loy domi la Aveda. You can't compare it to Aveda because Aveda who the when the Aveda was found after the Yush, so then we consider it beheter. He's taking it as if it's his. He may keep it. Aval hai, but the Ganib, he wanted to be surah asal yadei, since he stole it. He never legally obtained this item. Midirabanan too. It's only midirabanan. You cannot learn from Aveda that Yush is kohen b'deraisa. It's only at the kana. Why would the Rabbanan allow him to keep it after the Bailam Amiyayish? The Amar Rabbanan nikni mipnei takanos hashacham. Just to make it easier for people to return things and to do tshuva. And why they decided only to make it easier once the Bailam Amiyayish, I don't know. I guess the Bailam feel more separated from it. Rabbi Yosef disputes this whole theory, and he says Yish ain't a kohen, but freedom of the Rabbanan. Yish is not kohen at all. So if you steal something and the Bailam Amiyayish, it doesn't matter. You still have to give it back as is. So now we need to understand what's the tzad that we could possibly learn midaraisa from Aveda that Yish is kohen. So let's see what Rashi says. Moitza Aveda lav kivin the Miyayish lei mora mekamed teisel yadei kanila. Im nishayishu bailim kodim shemotza zeh kana. If by the time you find the Aveda, the bailim was already Miyayish, then the finder, as they say, finders keepers. The Tanya, but it's not finders keepers, losers weepers. It's pumfigert. If losers weepers, if he was Miyayish, then finders keepers. It's really out of order. Or you can learn. Or you can learn like sometimes in the Gemara, like we learned in the Gemara. It says you have to swear in order to be mechuyev on Tainas Ganav. And the Gemara dashes the pasuk that finders keepers if beforehand we already had a losers weepers, right? So Zog Gemara, the Tanya Bela Maxias, Minayin la Aveda Sheshot Fanor. How do we know that if you have an Aveda that was swept away by the river? Hoil v'nisyaishu abaylim, since for sure the Bailam are misyayish. If his Aveda was swept away in the river, Shehimu Teres, Hamad Loimar Shatoived Mimenu, it's lost only from him. That's where there's chiyuvim avashova. Shavuda mimenu mitzui l'shar b'nei adam. He left it in shul, left it in the mikveh, left it on the street. Yotzes a zoo, where nobody can have access to it. Why? Because it's in a river. There's for sure a yish, because there's no hope remaining that'll get it back. There, the finders allowed to keep it alma kani. So that's how you know that yish is koina by Aveda. Now, how do we apply it to Geneva? The asli yadei mikama yish vader ayayish sogile bedam. We're not suggesting you should be able to keep it. We're saying since if you did yish before I found Aveda, and it's beter asli yadei, you get to keep it completely with not paying at all. Maybe we can stretch it and say that by a Ganav, if there was yish after it came to his hands b'Isur, the yish should at least help that he can keep the object and pay back in cash. But Rashi's sort of making a logical jump. From Tosfos, we're going to see there's a direct connection. But let's just see the next Rashi. He doesn't have to find where he put it and give it back. He could just pay for it in cash. According to Rabbi Yosef, you always have to give back the object that you stole if there was no shinu. Tosfos is going to help us a little bit in the correlation between Aveda and Geneva, why the Yish should help. So first, I just want to touch on this Tosfos. I don't want to learn the whole Tosfos, but Tosfos argues with Rashi. Rashi learns, how do we know that Yish is kind of Aveda? Because it says, Asher Toived Mimenu Umatzasa, but if it was lost to everybody, where there's a clear indication that there was Yish, the finder can keep it. The Ri has a different makar. I'm going to read the Nafkal the Yish kind of Aveda, Mehad Amar Be'elam Metzias, and we learn Al Kol Aveda Sechicha, and it says Al Shora Chamor Asal Simla on a beged. And the Gemara Darshans Mas Simla Meyucheda Sheyesh LeSimonim Yesh LeToivim. Just what do you have to give back? You have to give back an Aveda that has Simonim and therefore has people who are going to come collect. Pirush of Tosfos Al Yidei Sheyesh LeSimonim. Since the object has Simonim Yesh LeToivim She'ena Bailam Misyayish. So the definition about the Ri understands the Gemara of Metzia of what does it mean Yesh LeSimonim Yesh LeToivim. The definition is that the Bailam weren't Miyayish. Because someone who has simonim on something won't be miyayish because he knows with the simonim he'll be able to find his object. Even sheyesh b'simin. That's how Tosfos learns. Rashi argues, and that's why Rashi couldn't use this as a makar to say that yish is kaina. That's why Rashi used the other limud of Asher Toived Mimen. Okay, let's skip to the next Tosus. Hakanami kivin de miyayish. Zok Tosus amari de kakasha, which is bothering us. Aval bi shein yishmoyel ba'aveda basha de asali yodei. Kitik Omar, just like the Gemara said. Lav kivin ayesh mora minod mekamed asali yodei kanilei uchadam aveda mitzvah be'edya. So how could you learn from the Yush of Aveda, which is before he got it, where there was a heteros liyodei to Geneva? Zok Tosus, and this is key. V'kamokim boil meleb shapir to Yush koina begezel basha de asali yodei. Even though it came to his hands, Be'isr. You know why? Because of a very important missing factoid that Tosos will share with us. The b'metzia nami nehi shaloi hayakoina le'inyan zeh shaloi yitztarech lahashiv ulifater legamrei. You're right. If the Bailam were mayayish after the person found the metzia, he doesn't get to keep the metzia. Because when he picked up the metzia, it was before Yush, and he had a chiyuv to return it. But mikol makom yish still helps even for avoida Aveda in this circumstance. Mikol makom hayakoina le'inyan zeh shalo yischayev l'shalem ki im domim kamoy legabe gezel. That's also an established fact that if someone finds an Aveda before Yush Bailam, so he has a chiyuv to give it back, and then the Bailam Amiyayish, the finder of the Aveda does not have to give back the actual object. He could pay money. That's mamish similar. That's mamish similar to Geneva. It came to your hands be'isr when it was still connected to the Bailam. Nevertheless, the Yush helps that I only have to pay back the dollar value and not the actual item. Where do you see this in the pasuk? I don't know, but according to Tosfos, we have a direct. It's not a jump. It's not a stretch. There's a direct link from Yush after the Chiyuv already came to give it back from Aveda to Geneva. Okay, Gewaltig. So the Gemara says, or do you say that since it's still be Yisur Asal Yada, even by Aveda, if you found it before Yish, it's still Bater Asal Yada, so maybe you can't make that jump. Now, the Gemara now is focusing on the Machlokes where Rabbi Yosef holds. Now, I don't know what the Nafkamina would be if Yish Koina Midaraisha Midarbanan. I'm not sure if there would be a Nafkamina Lalacha. But whatever the case is, the Gemara is not focusing on that now. The Gemara is going to focus on the Machlokes between Rabbi Yosef, who holds Yish is not Koina at all. So Esvei Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yosef was going to bring a raya that Yush was not koina to support his position. The halacha is gazal chom. Someone stole chometz before Pesach. Sorry.
Yush eine koina by gazlan.
Correct. Gazal chometz. And we're going to see there's a significant difference between a ganav and a gazlan. Not whether or not Yush is koina, but whether there's an assumption that there was Yush. Gazal chometz v'aval Pesach. Someone stole chometz and Pesach passed by, so now this chometz is worthless. It's also bano. Oimerloi, the gazlan can cynically give the iser anov chometz back, and he can say arei shel chol lefanecha. As Rashi says, Oimerloi nigzal harei shel chol lefanecha. Ve'en kamoishahu, if he has the exact chometz, the hezek she'enei nikar, it's a hezek she'enei nikar. It's a spiritual hezek, but physically the chometz has not changed states. Even the Mata Eden Isura, the owner who had this chometz stolen from him knows Erev Pesach that this chometz is becoming Asher Bana. Vade miyayish. Surely he was miyayish because he knows all is lost. V'sal kadaitach yish kana. If you hold yish kana, well, if that's the case, amai oimer lo yareshel chalafanecha. Why could the Ganav just give back the bread? He was koine the bread. And if he's koine the bread, now it's his bread that became Asher Bana, but his chiyuv to pay back still is there. So amai oimer lo yareshel chalafanecha. The Ganav should have to pay cash in full. Amrlei Zokt Rabba, you're right. When do I say Yushas Koina, Kikamina, Ano? That's Zemis Yaish, was a right to likeness. That's if the Ganav wants to be Koina, he can be Koina with the Yush, if it's beneficial to him. But in this particular instance, it's much better for the Ganav not to be Koina the Chometz. Zemis Yaish, was any right to likeness. This isn't Tama Ganav. This is not Tama Gazlan. This is a Gazlan Talmud Chochem. That I don't want. Your Chometz I don't need. Thank you very much. So therefore, in this case, Yush won't be koina. Yush is only koina if the person who's acquiring it wants the Yush. So as you could see, whenever these kashas happen, there's a broad halacha Yush is koina. Now we've already limited it. The Yush is only koina if the Ganav would want to be koina. Esvei Abai Rab.
This is only on the assumption that the Yush happened only right by this man of Frum.
Correct. We know for sure it must have happened by then. Must have happened by then,
Yeah,
because
but
why
if
wouldn't the Bible be Miyayish?
it happened before that, then the Gazel is Taket going.
Could be, yeah, in a chemin. Zoktamar, Esvei Abai LeRab. Esvei Abai LeRab. Abaya had a kasha to Rabbah. Again, Rabbah says Yishu's koina, we're going to prove that Yishu's not koina. Karbonai, it says in the parsha of Oila, im Oila Karbonai, so what do we do from Karbonai? His carbon, v'loy agazel. The Torah is teaching you that a stolen carbon is not a good carbon. It's going to be possible. Which means the fact that the Torah is teaching us this, it must be that it will become a carbon. There's a carbon that even though it's stolen, you're able to be makdishit with a Kedusha's carbon, but it will be a possible carbon. So those are the two facts that have to exist. So Hekadami, under what circumstances will a carbon actually be a carbon, yet it will still be possible because of the pasuk of carbon, right? If you stole an animal and you were makdashit, you made it into a carbon before Yiyush, Lama Likra. I don't need a pasuk to say that it's not a carbon. Shita, I can't be makdashit. Dr. Rashi Karbonai, Oila Karbonai, V'loya Gazel, the Gazel Lav L'Rotzenasi. A stolen carbon is not a Rotzen. Because the Gemara at this point thinks the Gazel Behemat Chulin, you stole a Chulin, the animal from somebody, the icy, and you brought it as a carbon, you were makdashit as a carbon. So the Gemara asks, hey Chidami, Inema, if you're going to take Lefnei Yush, so there's no kinyan here. So how could it be a good carbon? You can't be makdashit. As Rashi says, as Tosfos says, even if you're makdashit, it will not be Tovis Kedusha. Why? The Gazav the halacha is if you steal an animal and the Bailam will not misyayish yet, Shneim ein yochel lakdish. Zel if hishein shaloi, the God of it's because it's not his, the Zel if hishein b'shusoi, and the owner because it's not in his rishus. So that's not what the pasuk is referring to. Elalav lachayush. The pasuk must be referring to you stole an animal, the Bailam were miyayish, and even then, if you're makdish the carbon, it's going to be possible. Shemami no liyish leikani. It's a yish is not koina, because if yish was koina, it's completely yours. It's completely yours, and there shouldn't even be a psul, as Tosfos says. Shemami no yish leikani. The kani, if you were actually koina, and kain choshev shaper carbonai, it is your carbon, and therefore v'lay mifsul mishol mitzvah bavaver. I for Tosfos maybe the psul is mitzvah bavaver. Zok Tosfos that wouldn't be the case. Hoyelvu kanilai kodim shektishay. The only time it's mitzvah bavaver is if through the being makdish, like yish and shina rishos, through the hektish it becomes kodesh. Then you could call it a mitzvah bavavera. But if he owns it fair and square fully due to the yush before he's makdish it, that wouldn't even be a mitzvah bavavera. But if you're not kodesh with the yush, mifsal, then it makes sense it would be possible. I fractizes why is it become kodesh? When we call makom kadoshu, it will still be kodesh. So we're saying that if you hold yush is koina, or even if you hold Yush is koina, it shouldn't be a problem at all. But if you hold Yush is not koina, but there was Yush, the svara would be that it would work, it would become kodesh, yet it wouldn't be mutter because of the psul of karbonai. Avagav the other time of the Shinu Hashem, even though we don't know the svara of Shinu Hashem that when you make it into a carbon is a Shinu Hashem, and that's why it's chaps to kedusha. Rather, at this point, the Gemara thinks the Yush alone, even though it's not kind of lagamri, would have allowed me to make it a carbon. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. And still the Torah says the carbon is puzzle. So you have a kasha on Rava. And if you hold Yush is not koina, is it any better? How the Tanya, we learned a very interesting price. The halacha is anything that's on the mishkav of a zov is tamei. It says so you have a zav sitting on the bed. Now, even if the zav is not touching the bed, there's a sheet on the bed. Or if a zav is on 10 mattresses and you touch the bottom mattress when the zav is sitting on the top mattress, the halach is you become tamei. Because that bottom mattress becomes an avatuma, even though it's not touching the zav, becomes an avatuma. And if you touch an avatuma, a human could become tamei by touching an avatuma, he'll become a rishon. So it doesn't say v'isha sheyiga b'mishkav asher yishkav alav zav. It says mishkavoi, the zav is bed. So hadatanya mishkavoi v'lo yagazel. There's a brayta that says that if the bed is stolen, then it doesn't have too much mishkav v'moishav. It's a huge chiddush. Hey Chadami, what does the case mean? Either gazel amra ba'avdei mishkav, if he stole raw materials and he made it into a mishkav, That's mamish a regular shinu. Mi ikal aman da'amar shinu ma'isa loy kani. Would anybody hold that a shinu ma'isa is not koine? Everybody holds it's koine. So surely that would be considered his mishkav, his bed. So what's not considered his bed? And the ma'is lachameimer. What are you forced to say? The gazal mishkav the chavre. When it says mishkav v'loy gazal means he had a ready-made bed that belonged to somebody else. He stole that bed, and now he's on that bed. There they wouldn't be a tumas mishkav. Zok Gemara. Once you're saying that, hachanami the gazal carbon the chavre. You are assuming he stole an animal of chul, and then you tried to figure out if he's not. He stole the carbon. His friend was makish carbon. He stole the carbon. That's where it says the carbon is not good. So we need to know what it means. The carbon is not good for him, for the victim. So let's see Rashi. Zok look at Rashi. Ultimek the sokadaitach. The gazal chul vakashinu had the tani gabi zov mishkavay ish asher yigav mishkavay xeris hakasav lahaitzi is a mishkav gazal. It's a xeris hakasav that a stolen bed she'enei nasa avatum l'tamayod. It will not become an avatuma. Fact the Gemara. I'm sorry. Yes, but what the case is a machlokes. Mikal amanda Omar chad mahane miroi shinu lekani. Everybody else shinu is koine. We pass like Basil. Habi yishu the plea. The teretz is the gazal carbon the chavri. So what does it mean? The gazal carbon the chavri. Shehikdish chaveiroi. His friend was makdish a carbon, and now I stole a carbon that his friend was makdish. Pashtus the pasuk is speaking about an oila carbana. So your friend was makdish a carbon oila. You stole the carbon oila. The pasuk is speaking before Yush. The itzrich lashminan de oil the rotten klal of afilu lebailam harishonim ve'avagav lo yavish. If I steal someone's carbon and I take it to the base of Mikdash and I tell the carbon to be makbid as the carbon oila, the owner, the bailam, will not be yoyt to the carbon. That's not such a pashut fact, but that's what Rashi is saying.
Even if I say that it should be for him.
I think so, and we're going to see Tosfos in a minute about that. Lish nachrina, the gazal carbon the chavri means after Yish. Even if it was after Yish, he's not koina. The carbon ain't in nixel because the carbon can never be stolen. The chalecha de isay vegaza de rachman isay. Okay, Tosfos has a lot of argument on this. So let's first just touch on what Tosfos says. If you stole raw materials and made a bed, so Tosfos asks, why don't you say that this brisa that says mishkave v'lo gazul is going to Beis Shammai? So Tosfos, we don't like to say that because we know we pass like Beis Hillel. The gazul mishkav the chavri. Tosfos actually disputes Rashi that it means you stole a ready-made bed because Tosfos says if there's a regular finished bed of your friend that you steal, im gazla einem etam mishkav the gzeres hakasav. Zok Tosfos is zeutem. It's illogical that just because this bed is stolen, the Torah would say it's not matam. It doesn't make any sense. Because of that, and he brings other rise that's not what it's talking about. Because of that, Tosfos says, Umafarish Shri, I'm on the second intermediate line of Tosfos. The gazal mishkav the chavre is shegazal oirosh shel balabais. He stole hides that belong to a balabais. She'enan mechusarin ela yichud. They don't require any physical modification. All that's required is that he should decide that he wants to use it for a bed. It doesn't need any modification, and we're going to get into it in the next Gemara. And all he needs is machshava. So the question is that do you say that al yidei the yiyush, now I'm considered enough of an owner that through my machshava, it will designate this object as a bed, and therefore it will be metama tumas mishkav v'moshav? Or do you say the yush is not enough to transfer it into my permission, into my rishus, and even though I thought to make it into a bed, my thoughts aren't relevant. I'm not the owner. So that's how Tosfos frames it. So if we look at the last line of Tosfos, even though it's been before years, you're right, they're not similar, but the question is if my machshava helps. So what the way Tosfos is learning is the reason why mishkaveh v'lo gazul, it's because it's before Yush. Before Yush, the fact that I decided as the Ganav to make this into a bed is irrelevant because I don't control this. It's not my item. It's the item of the next. But let's look at the gazul carbon the chavri. So remember, Rashi learned even though it was a carbon oil that I stole, if it was la'acha Yush, if it was kodim Yush, it won't work at all. Not for him and not for the bailam, right? And if it was speaking la'acha Yush, it wouldn't work because you can't steal a carbon. Tosfos doesn't directly attack Rashi, but he disagrees. Tema, lama likra. Why would I need a pasuk to tell me that it's a pasuk of carbon? Let's think about it. The iba chatas, if the pasuk is talking about a chatas, which incidentally it's not, it's speaking about an oila. Hafilahu atzmai im achal chelav esmo. Even forget about the animal's carbon. If you ate chelav yesterday, b'shoigig, and then you designated the carbon chatas, and now you ate chelav again tomorrow, and you want to use the same carbon, you can't even use the same carbon that even belongs to you. Your own carbon you can't use for two separate averas. Surely you can't use somebody else's chatas, which was designated for his avera. So afilu hu atzmai machal chelav esmo, every carbon ain't chaber boy a carbon al chelav shachal yom on its own iser. So surely you can't use the animal's chatas. So that's not what the pasuk is telling you. It's carbon v'lo gazel. I don't need a pasuk for that. V'yiba oilo shlamim, and if you want to say we're talking about oilo v'lo shlamim, ha'aminu p'sachim, ha'moicher oilosai u'shlamav, one who tries to sell his oilo or shlamim, lo yasav like klum. That's even if he sold it. Surely, if he stole it without yish. So why do I need carbon v'lo gazel? So he disagrees with Rashi, where Rashi says that it's speaking before yish, and the chiddush is it's not like oilo bailim at all. Because Tosfos says it's all a question of whether it's going to work for him, and it surely doesn't work for him.
Right, but how do you know that
Probably not from Karbon V'Lo obviously. Otherwise, Tosfos is not asking the kasha. But for some reason, he rejects Rashi. The Rashi says the chiddush is that it doesn't even work for L'Baylam L'Shem Chayva. Maybe Tosfos argues, maybe he holds it would be L'Baylam L'Shem Chayva. But you near look what Tosfos says. It's speaking about a carbon Pesach. Why? The only carbon that you could change its ownership after it became a carbon is a carbon Pesach, because you could bring more people into your group, or you could sell it to somebody else in a different group. The only problem is we know it says we're talking about an oila. Maybe you'll say because it's not relevant. The ain loimer, like Rashi says, Shabbat Kosav lifts her like carbon, which was Rashi's svara, that it's possible even for the original Bailam. Darmin lakamon gabegonav shem shachat tamimim lifnim l'shem Bailam yashur ken lebailam. He brings a right from the Gemara that if you shecht tamimim l'shem Bailam, even if it's a ganev, it's considered that he returned it because it is oil lebailam shem chayva. So Tosfos argues in Rashi that it's not oil lebailam shem chayva. Now maybe it makes a difference if it was l'shem Bailam or not. The Gemara there is talking about l'shem bailam. It'll work, but maybe it's being not l'shem bailam, but not l'shem bailam. Even if it wasn't stolen, it would be a problem. So that's why Tosfos doesn't like Rashi. Sorry. Right. So that's why Tosfos argues in Rashi. Rashi says it doesn't work. Okay. So let's see the Gemara weiter. Eisvei by Rabbi Yosef. So once again, up until now we were asking kashas on the Rabbah to prove that Yish is not koida. Now we're going to ask kasha Rabbi Yosef. We're going to prove that Yish is koida. Orish Shabalabayis. If a simple homeowner has a hide, it's his. He's going to be the one to determine what this hide will become. If he has a machshava to make it into something that doesn't require any physical changes, he wants to make it into an area rug, into a tablecloth. The mere fact that he thinks to do that, that already designates it as a item. Now that it's an item, it could be makabel tumah. So Rashi machshav metamason balabayis eino asal moich. Normally, the balabais, he doesn't. Not everything in his house is for sale. He plans to keep it for himself. Therefore, what will he do with the hide? Beds, with dulbakais, with katablois. These are like tabletops. If he thought to use it for something that it doesn't require modification to become that thing, mekabel tumah miyad. We say the mekabel tumah right away because he's the boss. He can designate what the use of this leather will be. But for Shalabdon, if it's the owner of a store that tans hide, because he's never designating anything. Because if a customer, he might have in mind to make it into a tabletop, a customer is going to come along a bite and might want to make it into a pair of shoes. And for a pair of shoes, this is nowhere near the Gemar Melach. What about a Ganav? Shel Ganav machshava mitamasan. If a Ganav steals something, his machshav is metamet, which would indicate that the Ganav is koine, and under the same circumstances, shall Gazlan ein machshava mitamasan. So under whatever the case it is, we're assuming it's Yush, right? So by a Ganav, there's is Yush, and therefore the Ganav is controlled machshava mitamasan. But by a Gazlan, there's no Yush, and therefore ein machshava mitamasan. Rab Shimon Omer Chilaf Advarim. Shel Gazan Machshavim Etamazon. By a Gazan will assume there was Yosh, and therefore Machshavim Etamazon. V'shel Ganav Ein Machshavim Etamazon. Why? Lefi Shaloi Nisyai Shu Abaylim. So you see clearly whether or not the Machshavas Metama of the Ganav or the Gazan is totally 100% in whether or not there was Yosh. But the Yosh works to transfer the ownership, to make it now that the Ganav or the Gazan, depending on if you hold like Rab Shimon or the Rabbanon, could now designate what this object is. Ushmamina Yish Kana. Beautiful kasha. Now let's just understand what is the Machlekes Rab Shimon and the Rabbanon. So Zok, the Rishonim are very simple. The Rabbanon hold that Shel Ganav Machshavim Etamosin. Why? Because by a Ganav there's Yish. Something goes missing. Who took it? Where did it go? I don't know. I'm a Yayish. But a Gazan, I know who took it. He came and seized it from me. I'm going to find him. I'm going to get it back. So by a Gazan, a person is not Miyayish because he knows who took it and he's intent on getting it back. By a Ganav, he has no idea where to look. Therefore, he'll be Miyayish. Reb Shimon says the opposite. By a Ganav, he'll say, I'll seek it out, I'll find it, and I'll get it back. By a Gazan, he'll say, this guy's such a tough guy. You see, he grabbed it away from me. There's no way I'll be able to overpower him and get it back. So it's merely a shaila on where the Biden is being Miyayish more. But I'll call upon me see Yishus Kaina. Amalei no. We're not talking about just a machshava. We're talking about shekitzon. He also did a ma'aseh to it to make it tummy. So it wasn't just a yir shalom. It was actually a ma'aseh that he did. Now, yes, it could have become at the tabletop without any modification, but he trimmed it anyway to make it look nicer. Not that the balabais would have had to do that. The balabais could have had zinin just to use it as a tabletop, and it would have become tummy right away. But the gan of yish alone would not have been enough if it wasn't for the fact that he did some action to it. As Rashi says, the ikatarti. There's two things here. There's shinui ma'aseh, because he did have to cut and trim it, the yush, and yush as well. Yish grade like honey. So you don't have a right that yush alone is kind of yush with something else is kind of. One of the items that are discussed in this mission that we just quoted is an itzvah, which is a tablecloth. Rashi says it's a dul bekisha oichlin alav ukein shulchan. It's like a tabletop. The itzvah in shricha kitzuya. To make it into an itzvah, you don't need any type of modification at all. So how could you tell me that there's a shinui ma'aseh here that there was a modification done? The Tanam we learned kol makom shein chesron malacha. If in order to make something into whatever you intend to make it, it doesn't require any type of physical change. It's merely my intent to use it for that thing. Except for an itzvah that even though there's a chasar in malacha, still it's machshavim etamasoi. Why? Even though it needs a little trimming, machshavim etamasoi. But the reason why is because you want to make it look nicer. Amarava, hi milsa kashiba rabel Rabbi Yosef esrin utartin shnin. This was a kasha that we had on Rabbi Yosef, because this seems to indicate that Yishalon is kind of, because it's speaking about an itzvah. And the itzvah, we said, beferish, that Shava Bisham Mechasakitua Machshavim Metamasa. So it's the Machshava alone is Metamet without a Maisa, without a Shinoi. And you see that the Yish alone is kind of. So for 22 years, this was shver on Rabbi Yosef. When Rabbi Yosef became the Rosh Hashiva, finally he was able to have a terrace. I wonder why Punkt then, and I'll have a story to Rabbi Yaakov. Upark, then he answered it. What did he answer? He answered, Shinu Hashem Kishinu Ma'asadami. It's not just a Yush, it's also a Shinu Hashem, by having in mind that now it's not just a piece of leather, now it's actually a tabletop. That's a Shinu Ma'isa. And that's why it's kind of. My timer also may kara eitzim hashta kalim. Shinu Hashem nami may kara karile moshcha. They just called it a piece of leather. The hashta barzin. And now it's called a tabletop. So we have to stop now. But I just want to share a thought. Vosep is Rabbi Yosef couldn't figure this out, and 22 years later, when he finally became the Rosh Hashiva, he figured it out. So there's a story with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky when he was first a Cheder Rebbe. He had to teach a Gemara. I don't remember what Gemara was, and he didn't have Klor the Gemara. He didn't have it was Ksubis, and he didn't know the Gemara well. And he said how he told Hashem how he struggled to understand the Gemara. He was going to class the next day to teach the Sugya, and he didn't know the answer. And he dubbed to the Rebbeinu Shalom, I have a job to do. I got to teach these kids, and I don't know the Gemara. And suddenly, the next morning when he came into class, not magically, but suddenly he got a clerk out in the sugya. He mitchizach on this for years. He never had pshat, and now that he's about to teach the class, somehow it clicked in his head. He understood. So Rabbi Yaakov said, "There's a schus Torah. Schus Torah. Sometimes you're zoicha, sometimes you're not." And I wasn't zoicha. But parnasa, the Rebbeinu from guarantees to everybody. Now that this Gemara is going to affect my parnasa, Hashem said, "I got to give it to you because your parnasa I have to take care of." That's why I was zoicha to understand it in schus parnasa. So maybe when Yosef came to Rosh Yeshiva, when he's not a Rosh Yeshiva, he doesn't have to have all the answers. But once he became a Rosh Yeshiva, Hashem said, "Okay, I'm going to give you the answers," and that's how he was able to answer the kasha on it.
Zoekt de takken als het geweld mag de Biasse famous. Dat is ook de daar bekeken als je met meisje